Alright, this is the intro music. Howdy everyone. This is kind of it's the best I could do. Cool. I am going to walk through this app, how to set it up, making sure I'm still recording. I am. How to set it up, how to kind of get the environment itself set up with Node and everything else. I'll try to label all these sections on YouTube, so hopefully if you're not interested in some of it, you can jump around, but I'm going to try to be a little bit exhaustive. There's going to be some opinionated stuff in here in terms of like tools to use and things like that. But yeah, I think we're just going to get started. So there's already some folks who have their own fork, and there has been a couple changes since then. So this will only be accurate as of the date, which is May 17th, Sunday. In terms of the code walkthrough, a lot of the setup things will probably remain the same, even if you forked it quite a long time ago. That said, there's been some cool stuff that's come out, so maybe try to merge the upstream if you haven't in a bit. And that's a Git thing if you're not familiar with Git. I think the only tools that I assume people know are Git a little bit. I'll try to explain it when it comes up, but always feel free to ask me. I'm available. I usually hang around the Crown Heights Slack. That being said, let's get started. Okay, so say you come here and you want to make an app. So first thing you would do is fork it. We're just going to fork it to my personal account. It'll take a second. And here it is. Okay, so we have our personal fork here. It says it's forked from Crown Heights Mutual Aid. I'm going to go clone it. So I'm going to be working in Linux, but this should work well for Mac. My main setup is actually on Windows, so it is doable to apply this same thing to Windows using a thing called WSL, but I'm not going to cover that. Cool. So git clone. What this does is clones all the code from GitHub into our local directory here. Great. So now if we see what's up, we're going to cd into mutual aid app. Cool. So yeah, the first thing you might want to do is maybe try to run it. You heard that like it all starts at index, and you're familiar with Node. So you might say run in Node index. But we don't have Node installed. So I'm going to run through installing Node through a thing called nvm. So Node is a JavaScript interpreter that usually runs on servers. It is what this repository is written in. So we're going to have to install it first. I'm going to recommend that everyone install Node through the Node version manager, otherwise known as nvm. What this does is, since projects like the mutual aid app can use different versions of Node, this keeps it easy to kind of switch between different versions. And I'll show you how to do it. So if you type in nvm to Google, come down here, you can click install. I'm just going to type this in our terminal. Great. So it's downloading, and then it makes an nvm directory in my home directory, and it tells you to put this into your bash rc, which I have already done, which means that I should just be able to run nvm. Oh, nope, I have to source bash rc probably. And hopefully this will work. Let's see here. Great. So yeah, the steps that I did there was after putting this in bash rc, I sourced my bash rc, which is pretty much to run it by running that command. And then now nvm is pointed to the correct place. Great. So nvm, we have all these commands to do. We don't have to worry about most of these. We're already in our mutual aid app code, so the files that you see here are the same files that you see here, right? We just copied all the code, but we want to install it, right? So nvm, what do we do? Well, one common practice that we do here is to put the version of Node in a file called nvmrc, and it's 12.16.1. So that's the version of Node that we want to use for this repository. So we're going to do nvm use install actually. And what this does is looks for that file, and if it finds it, then it'll install the version that it says is there. So there we go. It says we're downloading 12.16.1. We're now using Node 12.16.1 because that's the only one we have since we just installed nvm. So it's just like, we'll use that as the default for now. All right. So now let's try to run Node again. Hey, look, we have like a little interpreter window. In fact, we could even run node index.js, which is the entry point to this app here. So let's try that. That's not too surprising, but it is now coming up with a different error. Okay, I have a sheet here. I'm going to look about what we're doing. nvm use. Okay. In addition to Node, nvm also installs the Node package manager, which is how you manage a bunch of different Node packages. It helps you install them given your version of Node and manage them usually in a folder called Node modules. All right. So since we've cloned, the reason for this error here is because the first thing you have to do to init a repository is run npm install. So what this does is it looks at this file, package.json. It goes in here, and it has a list of all the dependencies that we have for this project. And because it's a monorepo, there's quite a bit, including the dev dependencies. And if you install, it'll just start installing all of them. This might take a minute, so I already did it in a separate repository, which I'm going to change. It's actually moving pretty fast, so maybe we can just wait this out. No, let's go. All right, so I already did this. I already ran install in this other directory, and so this has all the dependencies. So if you look in Node modules, this was surprisingly present here, but it was because it was after install. If we go up a little bit and look at probably what was in the project, what was in the folder before, there's no Node modules. So after we ran npm install, it started downloading dependencies into Node modules, which you can again see here in this already initialized app. Cool. So you're probably, I don't like personally working in the terminal. I prefer VSCode. So I'm going to really quickly walk through VSCode and some things that might help you set it up. For one, you can just type in VSCode install to find installation instructions. It's really straightforward. I don't think there's too many crazy things that it has you do. It has instructions for all the different operating systems that you might use. All right, so I already have it installed. So what I like to do is go into the directory I want to work in, and then just type code dot, which means code in this directory. It'll open it right up. So here's the actual app. And VS Code's nice. It has like an integrated terminal that is pretty much the same as working in here. So I'm going to work only in VS Code for now, from here on out. All right. So VS Code, I'm going to do a quick little walkthrough of things I find really nice, especially for this project regarding VS Code. If you do Shift-Control-P, it opens up a helper, which if you start typing will show you things you can do. The first thing we want to do for working on this repo is installing extensions. The two that I use, well, the two that I installed for this demo are Vim and ESLint. You don't have to worry about Vim unless you like working with Vim, but ESLint I really recommend because this is how we maintain style for this repository. And what it does is it looks for this ESLint RC file, which exists here. And we have a bunch of style guides that we import. And what this does is if you try to commit a style error, let's say we just add 2 spaces to the beginning of this, then ESLint will come up with a little red squiggly that says, uh-oh, ESLint, and this is the rule name, says delete these 2 spaces here, which can easily be done. And it also comes up with a red error mark up in the top there. There's a bunch of different ways that you can run ESLint through VSCode. I'm going to start with the one I just mentioned, which is you can do Control-Shift-P, ESLint, fix auto fixable problems, and then that goes away. And then we write, we save. Let's see here. There's another thing you can install that I'm about to go into more, which is the npm extension. So if we do Control-Shift-P, install extensions, and then npm support for VS Code. And what this does is let you run npm commands, which I'm about to show you how to do. But I prefer working in the terminal for this kind of stuff, so I'm not going to install it. I don't like this Explorer view. I'm kind of new to VS Code, but I'm liking it, so I'm going to stick with it. I've used it in Node and Golang now. It's working well enough for me. All right, so we've downloaded the code. We have downloaded the mutual aid app code into a Git repository. You can see Git status to view our status. So we're on branch master. This won't really be a Git tutorial, but I'll include some Git stuff when we're talking about Heroku near the end. Let's see what's on this list. Right. So we've cloned our code. We have Node installed, which you can check by just typing Node. My keyboard's being slow. So that's installed. We have npm installed. We have run npm install, which has installed this Node modules folder of all the dependencies. And we're pretty much ready to rock. So what do you actually do if you want to run this locally to test it out before maybe pushing it to Heroku or wherever you want to serve it from? The entry point for pretty much anything you want to do locally, or pretty much anything you want to do running the app, is in scripts and package.json. So this is a bunch of different things that you could do, and it's usually, we try to be as descriptive as possible, but sometimes we're not. Running things locally is with this local command, and I'm going to run through every one of these coming up now. All right. So remember how I said that you can run ESLint in another way? Let's see that as an example with the package.json. So we have this error again, and if you wanted to use npm scripts to run it, you can go to package.json and see, okay, there's this fix command. I'm going to run that. And so you do npm run fix. And it'll take a second, but afterwards it should. Oh, okay, funny enough, it doesn't work in index.js because I have it. We're going to fix that right now. So it's only going in the scripts in the source directory, which is an issue. So we're going to run it on index.js as well, which should work. So let's try this again. We're going to add 2 lines. npm run fix. Am I working in the right? Oh, I just added it to the wrong thing. In fact, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to be added here. It says scripts. It's going to show some errors, so I'm not going to like it. But that's okay. Finding errors is good. All right, so let's run it one more time, just to prove a point. Boom. Okay, now it fixed it in index.js, and it probably fixed a lot of stuff in script as well. All right, I'm going to go a deep dive into the code later on in this video, but I'm going to give a 10,000-foot overview of this package really quick, just to kind of show what it offers. So this is inside our fork. If you just scroll down into the fork, it kind of tells you things that it could support. So the one that I know most forks are using, I think, is actually the web page, which is a React app. And it shows a map with open requests and a tool for looking up cross streets. There's also Slackbot and Twilio support and a reimbursement system. This is all based on Airtable, and unfortunately, it's tied pretty closely to the exact Airtable field names that exist here. So what this repository might function as for a lot of people is more so a starting point to kind of go further on whatever they want to do with it. But if you want to stay really closely to our Airtable as well, that's fine as well. Okay. So what we're going to do now is run all of these things locally to show you how, if you wanted to change them and work with them, you could. All right. So, index.js is the entry point for the server, which serves all of these things. So the server is needed for every single one of these because it is what runs 24/7 to continue to take requests from the Slack bot, take requests from Twilio phone calls, take requests for the web page, and also do polling to Airtable. So this is the entry point. If you wanted to run it, again, we look in package.json and we find npm run local. If you look for index.js, you can find it here, and it's called Express because that is the name of the server package that we use in our app. There's a couple different, but Express is a really common one. And if you run local express, which we're going to do, npm run local express, then it says it runs a server with all these different warnings. So it tells you, hey, the main airbase isn't registered. There's no Slack signing secret. There's no payments airbase. No payments airbase again. Airtable key is missing. Slack tokens are missing. Twilio tokens. So it tells you everything that is not going to be set, but it still works. So this mutual aid app is still listening on 5,000. All right, so how do you enable all these different things like Slack and Twilio and the React geo keys and everything like that? We're going to go through it, and we're going to start with talking about environment variables. So every program you've probably ever used has some way to control settings of it. A common way for running programs in general is, if you need it set on the operating system level, is to use something called environment variables. And we store all our environment variable settings in app.json. So we try to keep this up to date with everything that we're using. So if you go in here, these are all the names of the variables that we use to configure this app. And I'll show you how to get every single one of these. Yeah, and some of them they're all kind of per feature. The only ones that are really needed and things will probably not work if you don't have them are these two, the Airtable key and the Airtable base, because the Airtable is used as kind of a database. All right, so we already ran Express. Let's start with the easiest first and do React. Let me think here. Might not be as exciting. Okay. Yeah, let's run React. So we're going to run our Express server, which is necessary to serve the React app, and then we're going to run. What I do is creating another terminal tab here, local React. So this is the web app, and it'll take a second to boot up, but it sends you right to this URL where you can see changes live. Looks like there might be an error there, but you see this Slack attack, which means that we're serving correctly. So this Slack attack is, we're going to cover this more later, but if you go in index.js, this is where we start from the React app, then we go into web app and app, and our main path is probably here, home, and all it says is Slack attack. So if we want to change this to Slack no attack and then save, this will be reflected in our browser because this is just going. All right. So that is more or less how you run the React app. There's one more thing I want to cover in regards to React, is that it needs the Express server to run. So you see here, whenever this React app loads, it asks our Express server for some files. And what these files, as we're getting to later, is the strings that it needs to serve. So this contains a bunch of, like, all the strings for the neighborhood finder, which we can see here, /neighborhood finder. Yep. So all these strings are served via this web app.json, which would be cached in an actual situation, but is now just asking our Express server for it every time. All right. So yeah, this Express app is, or the React app is up and running. You'll see it says macpop tosin missing if something doesn't work, and I'm guessing this will fail because we haven't set any of those environment variables that I was talking about. Yep, they're loading. Let's see what exactly it says. Yep, 404. I'm a bit surprised it doesn't give more information, but we can fix that. All right, so you have the React up and running. Let's up the level to something more difficult. So we're gonna close this React app, Control-C. And we're gonna keep the Express server running for now. And we're going to talk about ngrok. In order to work on Slack locally or Twilio, it needs a website exposed on the public internet. Your local host is not. It is hidden behind your local subnet, unless you have like a reverse proxy or something. And what ngrok does is gives you that proxy for free without much setup, and it's pretty painless. And in fact, it's so painless that we can just run local Slack and it'll start an ngrok for us. So let's run that. npm, and hopefully, what would really suck is if my long-running npm, or my long-running ngrok instance, okay, it's not, sweet. So what this does is actually forwards this address to our Express server right here. And we can see that by going to this address in our browser. So let's copy this and go here and see what happens. That makes sense. So there's no file at build/index because we haven't built our React app. And I bet if we go to Express, it says the same thing. All right. So this is now being served on the public internet. you can go to this file to view it, as we just saw, and that is going to come in handy as we set up the Slack app right now. This is kind of a pain in the ass. It's not fun to do, but it's something that needs to be done. So I'm going to put all these links in the description, but you go to api.com/apps, and then we're going to create a new app. And you can do it based on whatever workspace you want. So we already have a test workspace. We're going to create this app. Something's went wrong. That's typical of Slack, honestly. I'm not surprised. Please just work. All right, there it goes. Okay, so you have this brand new created app, and you have all this information here. Slack kind of overwhelms you. What we need to do is tell Slack where to find us, which is this URL, and we also need to get tokens so that we can tell Slack what to do. So we're going to do all of that, and I recommend starting off with OAuth and permissions. So we maintain a list of permissions that you need in the main repo. If you scroll down, Slack only setup is all the commands you need. We're only going to do a couple because I don't want to enter all of these in here. So add OAuth scope, commands, and then let's add a couple more. Users read, users read. That's good for now. So once you start adding OAuth scopes, it'll offer you to install the app to the workspace, which is what we're going to do. This is where you allow the permissions that it asked you for. One thing that I want to improve is what these permissions are all used for specifically, to kind of let people know what exactly is happening. But okay, cool, we installed it. So what we have now is this bot user OAuth access token, which we're going to copy. And where do we copy it? I mentioned that all these variables are named in app.json, but where do you actually put them? Well, what happens is when you run the Express server, the first thing it does is sources this file called .env. And what .env does is store all your environment variables. And to make it handy, we created this m.example, which contains like a ready-made .env. So when you start off, you can copy it, paste it in here, and you want to rename it to just .env. Cool. And now that we have, now that we have our bot token, we're going to copy it and go in here and Slack bot token. And there it is. Signing secret, that's another thing we need. Well, you can find that in what I'm pretty sure is basic information. Yes. All right, so you select signing secret, copy it. And for the purposes, since this is just a testing app, I don't really care if people watching this video have access to these tokens, but normally anything in .env should be secret. And which is why, for one thing, this file isn't checked into Git. It's in Git ignore. And yeah, in general, everything in this file should just be secret. All right, so we have Slack bot token, our Slack signing secret. Let's tell it where to find us. So as you can read in the mutual aid app, we have a couple different shortcuts. So we're going to go to Slack API, and we're going to go to interactivity and shortcuts. We're going to turn it on, and we're going to tell it where to find us. And then it's going to be Slack/interactivity activity, which you can see is right here. And then we're going to create the shortcuts. Let's only do this last one for now. Select deliver needed request. and it says, okay, this is a global shortcut, as it said just now. The callback ID is this thing, and it's probably like post a new request. We're not going to do that for now. And create it. Great. So now we have the shortcut that I'll show you how to use in a second, and we're going to save it. And now we're going to try it out. So here's the test workspace that I was just talking about. We have just installed our app, which we called, I think, test app, my test app. And here it is, post a new request. So we're going to click it, and it says, sorry, that didn't work. Let's see why. We see here that post Slack interactivity worked. And I'm a bit surprised it swallowed that error, but we do know that it is reaching our server, which is good because that means ngrok is working. I'm a bit confused why this doesn't go through. Oh, duh. So because I was making changes to the Express app, I need to reload Express, which is really fast. And now our Slack thing is registered, so we're going to try it again. All right, post open request. Aha, okay, so now we actually get a little bit of information. And great. So the Slack part is now working, and you can make changes locally. So the reason that you got this error is kind of specific to the flow that we're talking about here, but anything we require that you do in the Slack app needs to be filled out with our volunteer form, which is part of our base here. So if you want to do anything, you need to have your email here. In this case, it looks like I did not, which is kind of surprising. Oh, you know what probably happened is it just errored when it looked up email because we haven't even set up our Airtable base yet. So let's do that as well, and this will probably work. So this thing was failing because our Airtable keys aren't set up. So we're going to go back to .env and set our Airtable base and our Airtable key. This is the main Airtable that we're talking about. It should look familiar, and we're going to go to help. API docs, grab the ID, and I'm going to have to pause this video because the Airtable key, the Airtable does keys in a silly way where it does it per user instead of kind of per app or project, which means my key has access to a bunch of different stuff, and I am not going to show it to y'all. So I'm going to pause the video for a sec and come back. All right, we're back, and let's make sure we're back. We are back, and I have now set the Airtable key, but I put it down here so y'all can't see it. Which means if we start Express again, and then let's try to do the same thing with Slack. It still says no volunteer with email. Bit surprising. Let's see what my email is on this one. It's mjmauer777. It should be the same thing. Double check. I'm gonna do live debugging here. So my email address is Gmail, which exists in this one. Let's actually save this for the in-depth code walkthrough. We'll come back to this. Okay, so we actually have Slack up and running now. That is all you need to do to kind of create a Slack app and get it running locally, I mean. All right, let's run Twilio locally for the sake of completeness, and then we can do the code walkthrough. Okay, so Twilio also requires the Express server be running. It also requires ngrok be running, which if you see in oh, I'm surprised we don't have a local Twilio. If it was local Twilio, it would just be this same thing. Because we need ngrok running for Twilio. Okay, so let's run the Express server. And I'm going to go to my Twilio console, which I have open. And this is actually for a different project, but it's useful. So if you go to numbers, and it'll invite you, if you go here, to like create a number if you haven't already. I recommend having a test number and a like production number. We click here. And scroll down. And then we add our ngrok to right here. So which is what we're going to do. In fact, I don't think it's actually called language handler. So it's Twilio/call handler. Which we're going to add. And we need our ngrok URL. All right, great. Is Twilio/call handler. Great, great, great. And then we're going to save. Cool. Let's actually test this out now. I'm going to try calling on my phone. So again, this is a test number, and it'll just, once you call, post a webhook here. 646. I'm going to try to put it on speaker. 5360.
An application error has occurred. Goodbye.
Did you hear that? An application error has occurred. That's what we want people to hear when they call our number. Interesting. So let's actually just go into call. Let's do a little bit of debugging. Voicemail URL. One thing I don't understand is why this is returning not found for everything. I'm going to pause things for a second. I'm silly. It's because, once again, I forgot to add the Twilio auth token. So, of course, I shouldn't really expect Twilio to be working. And it told me so when I started the server. Right here, in fact, Twilio callbacks are not enabled. So, I'm going to do the same thing and add Twilio auth token to my environment. And again, this is kind of a sensitive one, so I'm going to pause the video and come back. All right, I set the Twilio auth token and moved that variable to the bottom, so y'all can't see it. And now we're going to restart the Express server. And I'm going to call again. You can see that Twilio is now enabled. It doesn't have a message here.
We are sorry. An application error has occurred. Goodbye.
Interesting, interesting, interesting. Did I name it right? Twilio call handler. Yeah, that's right. Post, and then it got something else. What is it getting? Oh, okay. So full transparency, Crown Heights doesn't actually use this. I included it more as like a template to get people up and running. And since I added these string wrappers, what is happening is Express is attempting to serve a Twilio strings from the Twilio string library, which doesn't exist, which I'll get into later. Suffice to say, that's how you would set up Twilio if this was working. It's not, and I'll fix it later. But this is more kind of a demo to like how. Hey y'all, sorry about that. I accidentally went directly to my Twilio page with my token just up and visible to everybody. I was stupid. All right, so now we've run Slack locally, we've run Twilio locally, we've run the React app locally. So that's pretty much everything you can run locally. So let's now dig in to Slack and all the other libraries and see exactly what's happening. So let's start where we started with React. So when you run a React app, we can close ngrok now. React. It opens this. And like we mentioned, we have the delivery needed map as well as this is like delivery needed is what it's called. And then the tool for looking up cross streets and neighborhood zone is called neighborhood finder. We don't do all the calculations on the React app in the browser. So what we actually do is have another API for handling stuff like this. So let's start with neighborhood finder and show what happens when you go to neighborhood finder. Great. So what this does is, if we go into React app, brief overview is it's served starting from index.js, and it's in the source directory because it's create React app. And to avoid Webpack things, we kind of decided just to keep going with create React app. And it requires that index be in source, so that's why it's here. And this looks kind of like standard React stuff. We use Material UI just to make things easier on people who might not be familiar. Like, we don't have to keep a kind of standard style. It's much easier in that way. Yeah, and so it loads app as the main app. Let's go to that. And this is the router. So for each thing under router, you can see a path. So neighborhood finder is one, and delivery needed is another. And we also have home, which is that just simple Slack attack thing that you saw before. So if you go to React app home, it's just Slack no attack, which we changed. So let's go back to neighborhood finder. So for this path, it loads neighborhood finder, which you can find in pages. So a pages is each one of these that you would find in the router. That's what should go in pages. So home, again, we said Slack no attack. Let's look at neighborhood finder. What neighborhood finder does is displays the forms that you see here. And when you click, let's scroll down. So this is all the stuff we set up. All the text, and then you see this on submit, handle submit. So let's see what that does. Go up, handle submit calls this submit, which you can see right here. And Axios is a common way to make HTTP requests in JavaScript. So what it does is calls API. So now we go to our API, which is served by Express. So let's actually try it. We see that it actually called this API geo address metadata, but it didn't work. We have a 404. So let's dig into the API to see exactly what's going on. It kind of mirrors the naming of these things. So we go into neighborhood finder, and what we're doing is address metadata is get address meta. And you can kind of tell the reason it's kind of obvious to me, of course, but we don't have any of these environment variables set. I'm actually not going to do this as part of this video. I guess partly because I don't want to have to manage going through the whole process of signing up for a GeoName account, let alone a Google account, which is even kind of more annoying. But this is doable. And then once you have these and you add them to .env, as we did before, which is Google Maps client ID, GeoName client ID, and all the instructions for those are in app.json, then this thing will work, hopefully like a charm. And what it does is it gets the address that we put in here, an address, it looks it up on the Google Geo client, and it returns a neighborhood and a lat long. And unfortunately, it can't return an intersection, which is what we're looking for. So we use the GeoNames client for that, to find the nearest intersection given the lat and long. After that, so we have a lat long intersection and a neighborhood. The last thing we want is to know which zone they're in. And we do that by a static asset that is inside lib. It's crown heights JSON. And this is something that you can create in Mapbox that zones out your neighborhood. Alrighty. So we went through Neighborhood Finder. I think now is the time to pause, having gone through one of the main repos, and talk about the lib. The lib, standing for library, contains a lot of shared code that is shared through all of the source here. So let's clean this up. So you have Slack app, Twilio, web app, workers, and API. So we've dug into web app and API a little bit. All of the things depend on lib. And lib contains common logic for airtable, static assets, which is that crown heights we just saw. Cache. So this cache caches geo request lookups, so we're not making the same request again and again. It just makes an LRU cache. Common things for Slack and common things for strings. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and we're going to start with strings because that's actually pretty weird, but actually insanely helpful as well. All right. So a problem you run into when you're trying to share code across a bunch of different places is string management. They tend to be all over the place in the code. Hard-coded strings are hard to read. They're hard to internationalize if you want to support, say, Spanish or something. And so there's this thing called I-18 Next, which stands for internationalization and then Ext, but it's really, well, I guess it could be extension. I don't know. It's I-18 Next. That's the name of the framework we're using. And this is a lot of boilerplate, but what it does is searches through your code. And so anytime you see, let's go back to the web app. Anytime you see, where is it? We'll scroll down. Oh, okay. Yeah, it was this use translation, which is from React I-18 Next. It wraps strings and stores them as a resource path. So this is called a namespace. And then this is the path to the resource within the namespace. The way you do this is start with a string like this and add it just like you see here. So say like you want to do, let's include another string here. Can you use the link to below? Let's do it somewhere down here. All right, so this is the neighborhood finder. Let's add another string. First thing you do is say, okay, so it's still part of our zone finder, and we're going to say, let's see, label, or let's say welcome label. Great. And the way you can use this is the first thing you do is include a default value, so like welcome user. And now it will serve it. So welcome user. It's kind of appended on ugly there, but that makes sense. And what happens is if you now run, we're going to close the server for a second, npm run, let's look at our package.json, find new strings. Find new strings. So we see add a new translation key, welcome label, welcome user, and it says to webapp.json. So if we go back to strings and go in locales, you see this has been changed. And this contains all of the strings for the web app. You can see it kind of maps onto the different packages here. Welcome user, so that's part of the zone finder. And this makes it really easy if you want to change a string to go in and like if this repo is being forked, you can really quickly like go through and see everywhere Crown Heights is used and then take out and put in the name of your neighborhood or something similar to that. You can reuse URLs. So instead of having a bunch of hard-coded strings to a certain URL, you can put URLs in here. It's just a great thing to centralize strings. And now if you go back, if you actually change this, it won't be My thing's frozen. Not shown. Come on. What's going on? Welcome user, not shown. This actually won't be shown because it's defaulting to the web app, and we have to run Express again. Let's see here. Oh my God. See, welcome user. Even if we refresh, welcome user. And so now if you want to change this, you go into web app.json. So we're going to do welcome user new. Go back and then refresh, welcome user new. Now, you might be wondering, why did we have to refresh there? I thought React would load automatically. Well, because this JSON isn't loaded with the React app, what's actually happening is the Express server is serving it. So you can see here that we just got the web app.json, which happens on refresh. And once you can leave the default string in there just to kind of show maybe a developer what's going on here, but it's kind of up to you there. You can delete it and it'll still load fine. Welcome user new, and you can still change it. And it'll still change. Great. All right. That's an introduction to how the strings work. And this is in the React app, but it's the same thing for the Slack app. So let's really quickly take a peek in there and go into sign delivery. What you'll see a bunch of places is string and the same thing you saw before. So this one doesn't have a default. Some of them might. But most of these are included in the Slack app, which if you go back to strings is in here, right? So a bunch of strings. It's, I think, much easier to centralize and kind of see where to make changes. Great. So this is 10,000, or a pretty, I guess, somewhat in-depth overview of strings. Yeah, and the wrapper is a super simple. The default export for IT Next is this T function. And I just prefer the name string. I think it makes sense. And it also directs people back to this folder. If they see this being imported in the code, they can come back to strings and find out what's happening. And this is all summed up in the readmes for hopefully the directory. All right, Slack. This one's easier. For the most part, the name of the method in the Slack lib is self-explanatory. So this has a lot of channel help functions. If you call all channels, it gets all channels, find channel by name, add bot to channel, and use user and channel. Constants, you can see the string being used here again. And then just kind of hard-coded Slack constants. This one guards methods, so when they fail, they show an error message to the user. Home is this section of the app where if you go down to COVID, I guess, okay, so home is this part. I don't think it's used too much, but if you get a DM, it might be. All right, users, another simple one, get Slack ID for email. Views is this is like handlers for constructing views themselves. Slack has kind of a, what I find annoying thing called blocks. It's powerful, but it's also very verbose. You have to do a lot of repeating, and it's just JSON at the end of the day. So this kind of structures some common views like successes and errors together. The web API is a wrapper for the Slack web API for telling Slack what to do. Great, so that's Slack. Cache is really simple. I already explained, it's just an LRU cache. This is used to cache API lookups. Assets is just our geography for Crown Heights. And airtable. Airtable is really interesting. So bases is just the initialization of the Airtable base API. Constants is, I guess, just a single constant for like, this is Airtable has a limit on the number of records you can update at once. So it's 10. We have a constant for that. Let's go into tables. That's where things get funky. So each file in here is the name of a separate table. So if we go back to our staging app, you can see we have requests, volunteers, just like we have requests, volunteers. We also have the P2P Money app, donors, payment requests, donor payments. Same thing here. So let's dig in. What each table includes is common methods for using that table. And then at the very bottom, it includes the entire schema. You might be wondering, are you crazy people? Did you actually type all this up? And no, we didn't. We have a script that generates a JSON similar to this. And the way this works is you copy all this, you change the name of the table you want to generate, you copy all this, and then here, I'll just show you. So copy, and then what you do is go into the API for the table that you were talking about, open up, and this is, I know, a little bit crazy. Go to JavaScript, open this up, console, and enter this in. It'll say undefined, but what will happen is it'll copy this to your clipboard. And now you have all of these options. And you can just copy this and then paste it at the end of whatever request you want. And so now you can easily refer to this and you don't have to keep like looking, oh, did that name change? Did that name change? Makes it a little bit easier. So let's really quickly go through some of these. A lot of these are kind of dependent on the field names we use. So we have, some of them are kind of more obvious though. These are just helpers. Delete request, deletes request, create request, find request by external ID. This is used for mutual aid NYC. And just in general, any request from different systems. And I'll go back to API in a second to show you exactly what's happening there. But we have a field called external ID. And so this field, this record must have been added from MA NYC, or at least me for testing. Find delivery needed requests. This is for the delivery needed web app portion. Find open request for Slack. The point is all of these use the request table, as you can see here. So anything that has to do with the request table will be in here. Airtable doesn't have joins, so it kind of makes it easier to simplify logic. Volunteer is a little bit simpler, but still find volunteer by email. It's the same idea all across the board. I agree documentation needs to be better, but the name of the method is a good starter for what's actually happening. All right, so that's Airtable, and that is lib. That's everything you can depend on. Oh yeah, and you can reference this by using a tilde in the Express server, maybe not the React app, but let's go to API for instance, and let's start talking about that. So let's start with neighborhood finder. You can refer to things in the lib with a tilde. So tilde, and then assets, crownheights.json. We already talked about this. Let's go to update request. This is what happens when after, if you got a successful hit here, it would say, do you want to update a request? And it would say, put in the code here. And then you can click, and then it'll send to this endpoint and write the request. So you can see update request by code is from the request table. And it'll just request update with the things that it got from the web app. Delivery needed API. Again, it kind of operates in a similar fashion. This is where we're doing the caching. So when we get a result for a given address, we cache it so we don't have to look it up again and again as people visit the page and refresh the map. Yes. And then the last one at API is auth. Anything under auth is going to be require basic authentication, aka a username and password to access. And we use this for that external ID, which MANYC, when they have a request for Crown Heights, can send us things. And we authenticate them. And then we find if it already exists, then we tell them. And then we create a new request with the information they send us. And outtake is the same thing in reverse. It's them telling us that a request has been handled by them. And so we do the same thing. We find our external request, and then we actually delete it on our end. Sweet. So that's the API. I'm going to really quickly cover Twilio. Twilio's API I found kind of annoying to work with. It's not the most clear. What it's actually doing, for each handler in Twilio, it constructs XML. So each of these methods, what it's actually doing under the hood is constructing XML based on what you called conditionally. And then it sends the XML back to Twilio, which is based on what it's used to do. So in a perfect world, if this was working and I set up this correctly, then it would say this on the response, and then it would start recording. And what this does is then sends it to the call handler callback, which is here. Twilio sends us like the recording URL, the phone number and stuff. And then we use that information to create a request. Super easy. That's Twilio. Slack app is a little bit more nuts. All right. So for interactivity, this is where Slack starts. You want to start at endpoints. I only set up interactivity when we're doing the Slack app before, so I'm going to set up events as well right now, and just listen to on message. So let's go here, event subscriptions. Let's enable it. It'll probably have me verify it. Let's see here. So we have Express running. We need ngrok, which we can do npm run local Slack. Great. And then we grab this. I said we grab this. And then pop it in here. And then say Slack. No. Slack events. And it'll verify because it just called our thing and it says okay. And then we're going to subscribe to a few events. We're going to subscribe to message channels, message.channel. That's what we want. So now Slack will let us know when we get message.channel. Great. And then we have to reinstall it. Yada. Now we're done. All right, so we send up interactivity events and these OAuth permissions. Cool. And so the entry point to everything Slack does is through endpoints. For events, this is that on reply listener that we just created. So if you go and do event listeners, which we listen for a message to occur. So Slack events.onMessage, which is what we just registered for. We're going to filter and reply. We make sure it's not from a bot. And I didn't really want to cover features exactly in the video, but this is kind of a new one, reimbursement. What happens is if we go here, community reimbursement, as people comment and say sent 3825, the bot will reply and then create new tables in our separate airbase for payment requests. Yeah. And so for each donor payment, if they have a Slack ID, then that's coming from the person who created the message. So for instance, it might be Megan's Slack ID for like 38 point whatever dollars. Great. And so that's what's happening here. And it is reimbursement reply, and then it creates a new donor payment. and then it posts that message back to Slack. I'm not going to cover home opened. This is the home section I was mentioning before that I don't think is used by too many people, but can be found if you go to the app. So it's this page right here. So those are events. Those are things that Slack sends to us, and interactivity is another thing that Slack could send to us. And these flows are triggered by actions. So for example, what we were doing before, when we do post a new request, that is an interactivity thing, as Slack calls it. And so let's actually look what's happening. Delivery request post is what's happening here, and then they each have registered callbacks. And then we go into flows, which is more the interactivity side of things. Create delivery request. I am not going to go through all this. It's somewhat documented, but a lot of it is just bulky block kit stuff for Slack, which is how you construct views. Yeah. I might create a separate video maybe that should should really come before this one about how this functionality is actually working and what's happening as part of this, which I'll do. Great. So that's, pretty much a Slack app at a high level. Like I just mentioned, I'll create a new video for kind of describing the functionality. Workers. Workers is the last thing we have to talk about. And workers are kind of cool. Because we have Express Server, which is just long running on Heroku maybe, we can take advantage of that to ask Airtable what's happening every couple seconds. Alex Quick created a package that we separated out as a new NPM package and now maintain called Airtable Change Detector. What this does is if you set Airtable sync right here, it says this is the sync frequency for running the worker. Then we can react to changes in Airtable. So every interval seconds, which interval is set to, I think, 10 seconds or 15, depending on the instance, we look in the request table to see what's changed. Status, delivery, Slack ID, backfill. If any of these things change, then we kind of update the message content. What you're usually doing is saying, hey, reimbursement is complete, or the delivery has been accepted, or something like that. And then we have a similar one for mutual aid NYC that says if anything changed with them, then we notify them. And for example, for notify NYC, if it's complete, then we tell them about it. If it's assigned, then we also tell them about it. And that's what this is doing, is sending a webhook using Access again. And then there's payments exist as well, but I'm not going to cover these. I think just like what this thing is actually doing would make more sense. Okay, I'm going to take a pause. This is all the code. I'm going to show you now how to change it to, or deploy it to Heroku and then make changes to that. But I'm going to pause first because I need a glass of water. All right. Now that we've gone through the code, the last thing we're going to do is deploy the app. In this case, we're going to use Heroku, but it can be deployed on any cloud service, any server that's running Node.js. And if you're doing it on your own server, you might need, reverse proxy in front of it. But we're going to deploy it on Heroku. So the first thing, I prefer managing Heroku from the command line. You can do it in the client as well, or in the web client. So let's do Heroku CLI to install the command line interface. I've already done this, but here's the command I ran. What it does is installs Heroku. So you can see I have it installed. You might notice the Node version they're using is the same as the one we use in this project, and that's not a coincidence. Since this is being deployed to Heroku, that's where we fix our Node version to. All right, so we have Heroku CLI installed. The next thing it'll tell us to do is log in, which I've also already done. So yeah, Heroku login. I should already be logged in. Great. Yeah, I'm logged in. Sweet. Logged in. Let's create our app. We could do this from the command line. I'm actually going to do it from the GitHub repo because on this first page here, we have this convenient little button that says deploy to Heroku. So we're going to click that, and it's going to take us to create an app page. So we want to give our name test MA app. We can call it whatever. Let's actually make it staging. So staging means like a testing environment. What you'd normally have is like a staging app, which we have here, and this includes all like the testing credentials. So like the test Slack workspace and maybe a test Twilio phone number, maybe like testing Mapbox tokens as well. And then you would also create another app by doing the same thing we just did. Maybe like this name, just MA app. But let's just do the staging app. You would then go in and fill everything from our M file here into the Heroku. But you don't need any of this to start up. You can go back and fill it in later, and I'll show you how. So for now, we're just going to start with a lowercase letter. Staging. I can't remember if this might be. Okay, cool. That's fine. Deploy app. So it'll take a second, but it'll configure everything. It'll install all the dependencies that you do by npm install. And then it'll tell you that you can look at stuff. And so we're going to wait around a second here. In fact, I'm going to pause and come back. All right. Our app is now deployed. It is built and installed all dependencies. So let's actually view it. Slack attack. Great. Remember we changed this, but the reason it's not changed is because we are pushing the thing that is currently in GitHub right now, which is what Heroku initially pulls from. Let's go to Manage App. I usually don't spend too much time here. You can do most of it from the command line, and in fact there isn't much to do. You can view logs right here. So if we go up here, this is us opening the web app. And another thing you can do is set config variables. So there's nothing set right now because we didn't set anything on setup, but these are the same things that exist in .env. Cool. So you have this app set up. What do you do now? Well, one thing I really like about Heroku is that it just deploys from Git. So it hosts a Git repository on Heroku servers, and anytime you push to that, then it will start a deploy of the app. So let's see how to do that in the Heroku CLI. So let's see, probably git remote Heroku, creating Heroku remote. And it's just a remote. One thing you could do if you're familiar with Git is just git remote and then this URL, but let's do something via Heroku. Great, so we have Heroku CLI installed. Let's look at the remotes we currently have. So because we downloaded this from GitHub, then we have, oh shoot. Yeah, this isn't from our fork. If we go back to the fork we initially did, what will probably happen is, am I spelling it wrong? Yeah, I am. If we do git remote v here, then it'll be from our fork. But let's just go back and do the other one. So we have our origin remote is the GitHub repository. Now let's add one for Heroku, and it has a little thing right here. If you're already existing Heroku app, which we just created, then you can do this. So Heroku git remote a, and then the name of our app, which was staging MA app. Great. So now if we do git remote v again, we'll see this. One thing you might want to do is rename this to something like staging, so it'll be more clear. Can't remember how to change the name. Oh, there we go. Git remote rename. That's it. And then you just name the app. So Roku, let's name this upstream staging. So now if we do a git remote time staging. So this is the one on Heroku. This is the one on Origin. So we've made a couple changes throughout this thing. So let's look at what we're dealing with here. Let's just really quickly create a commit, fix some stuff. So if you wanted to push to Origin, which I'm not going to, you could do git push origin master, which means push all our changes to the origin remote, which we know from git remote v is GitHub. What we want to do in this case, say we want to push all our changes to Heroku, just to test them out in staging. So then we would do git push staging, and then the branch master, right? And then it'll start writing, and Heroku will tell you that it's going to start a push. In which, in fact, I think it's doing here. Yep. Okay. So now Heroku is running all this stuff, and yada yada yada. It'll let you know when it's done, and then it'll see our changes in Slack. Let's stop this. Let's say you're working on a feature. So you want to check out my new feature, right? So you're on this new feature branch, and let's say you want to push it to staging because you've run a bunch of things locally, and now you just want to see what it's like in the Heroku environment. Then it's the similar command, git push staging, except you name now your branch name, my new feature, and then master. So this is the branch that you're going to be pushing to the remote master, and then it'll do the same thing. Great. That's pretty much it with Heroku. Oh yeah, logs. So Heroku logs, tail, apps, staging, MA app. Let's see what's going on here. Great. So this is, you can see it starting up, build succeeded. It's telling us there's no config variable set. Then we see the request that we did to the web app. And then you see the 2 builds that we just started by pushing to Git. Great. That's Heroku. One thing I realized that while I had this paused, I forgot to do was talk about scripts. It's really the last thing that I think we haven't talked about. Python is in the midst of, I think, changing, so I'm not going to focus here. Instead, there's a couple Slack-related scripts that might be useful for Slack. One is adding all users to a channel. I need to clean this up a little bit to make it more obvious what the parameters are and like actual arguments, and maybe make it more like actually command line script. But what I normally do is just now change this locally and then run it locally. And like everything, there's this command in package.json for running scripts. If you're running a local script, what it does is sources the config variables from .env and then runs any script you do. So it would look like this: npm run local script, and then the name of the script. So let's see, add all users to channel. All right, it'd be scripts.js scripts. Add all users to channel, and it's not going to work because it's a different Slack thing. It's a different channel. But if you were to change this channel name, it would work. And then you can also see there's a prod script. This will source things from env.prod. Both of these are git ignored, so they shouldn't be checked into GitHub or Heroku or anywhere. But env.prod should contain, like, if you have different, in a staging environment and a production environment, env.prod would contain the production variables, but it would have the same variables as .env. That's scripts. There's nothing too crazy going on here. Most of them are, I think, self-evident from the name. Maybe a slightly weird code, but a lot of logging and stuff like that. Shouldn't be too hard to parse a lot of these. Trigger worker backfill is kind of weird. The airtable change detector works by detecting changes in fields. But it can be kind of frustrating to write custom logic and scripts when we already have a worker that does something. So one thing we might do is watch trigger backfill and then update message content based on that, so we don't have to manually tweak something status or delivery Slack ID or something. And that's pretty much it. I'm super available for the most part. I don't want to say super available, but I'm free to ask questions. I'm thinking about maybe doing like a stream of me coding, maybe not necessarily on this for anyone who's interested, but yeah, here to help people learn, get accustomed, and just help out in general. It's not, the repository is not perfect. It was kind of, an immediate response kind of thing, but always submitting, always accepting pull requests, more help, more documentation. Yeah, we're doing what we can. Hope this made sense. I know it's a bit long, but thanks for listening.